Hello, BookTube. I want to talk to you a little about books past, present, and yet to come. I've got a mess of things that I want to somehow organize on camera here and talk about. I miss talking to you about books, and I figure I don't need to have any kind of super scientific master plan in order to do that. So I thought we'd kick things off with a couple of books that are yet to come, because there are a couple of packages here that I got in the mail just recently. So I thought we'd go through those, see if there's two of these. We'll see if either one of these becomes something that I'm going to read right away, or that I'm going to put on the docket for right away. Okay, this is from Farrar, Straus and Giroux. This is the date on it is mid-July, so this has already come out. This is an advance copy of Momus Nietzsche, a memoir in pastiche. It's sort of mocked up to look like an ex-library book. Doesn't have a pub sheet of any kind here. One somewhat obscure Scottish pop star, 6 decades, 217 narrators. Nick Curry, aka Momus, named for the ancient Greek god of mockery and described by The Guardian as the David Bowie of the art pop underground, has recorded more than 30 albums for labels like 4AD and Creation, published half a dozen works of speculative fiction, and written articles for the New York Times, Wired, Artforum, The Wire. An unknown band called Pulp once asked him to produce their next album. He said no. An unknown band called Of Montreal once invited him to go on tour with them. He said no. He's collaborated with Vampire Weekend and the Magnetic Field's Stephen Merritt. One of his songs is regularly covered by Amanda Palmer in concert. He's had an impression of his penis preserved by the notorious Cynthia Plastercaster. Maybe you've heard of him. Probably you haven't. This is his story, or rather stories. Because Nietzsche, okay, I guess Nietzsche is the title of the book, isn't any old showbiz memoir. Rather than one avuncular tale told in his own voice, Momus has structured the narrative of his life as a mockery of the rock bio oral history. Instead of using living witnesses, Momus assumes the voices of 217 dead authors and artists and forces them to speak for and about him. Okay. All right. Well, I'm not the target audience here, but so I'm not sure that it vaults immediately to the head of the reading list, except that if that pub date is correct, then it's got a little bit of urgency behind it because it's out already. So I'll have to double check the pub date and see. But let's see if we can't do a little better on the next one here. Okay, all right. Yeah, this is a finished copy of something we've seen already here. This is David Bell's Men on Horseback. The power and charisma of charisma in the age of revolution. And we have signature people: George Washington, Simon Bolivar, if I remember correctly, Napoleon Bonaparte. Let's see what we have here. Men on Horseback. In Men on Horseback, the Princeton University historian David Bell provides a dramatic new interpretation of modern politics, arguing that the history of democracy is inextricable from the history of charisma, its shadow self. Okay. All right. Okay. Bell begins with the forgotten story of Corsica's Pasquale Paoli, whose exploits were renowned throughout the Atlantic world. It's true. It's talked about in the White House. Paoli would become a signal influence on both George Washington's America and Napoleon Bonaparte's France. In turn, Bonaparte would exalt Washington even as he fashioned an entirely different form of leadership. In the same period, Toussaint Louverture used his charismatic gifts to make French revolutionary ideals a reality for the formerly enslaved people of what would become Haiti, only to be betrayed by Napoleon himself. Simon Bolivar witnessed the coronation of Napoleon and later sought refuge in newly independent Haiti as he fought to liberate Latin America from Spanish rule. In tracing these stories and their interconnection, Bell weaves a spellbinding tale of power and its ability to mesmerize. Okay, so we have chapters on these individual people. The reason I seem a little bit, yes, we have chapters on these individual people. The reason I seem a little bit dubious is because for large chunks of its history before June 20th, 2020, the United States got by specifically by getting rid of charisma. Charisma would get you into office, but then you became a beaten down drone of the system if you were a president. Many of America's most effective presidents have had very little in the way of charisma. So, and as a result, America has avoided the stereotypical strongman pattern most of the time. That has all now changed, but once upon, for 200 and something years, 220 years, that was true. But I guess if Washington's in here, that might make sense. I've read about a few of these people, and a few of them I haven't read about as much as I should. Simon Bolivar I've read about quite a bit. Washington I've read about quite a bit. Napoleon way too much. But a couple of those others, Toussaint Louverture is the subject of a fantastic new book that's about to come out called Black Spartacus, I believe is the name of it. So I haven't read this. I've had the advanced copy of this thing and I haven't read it. And probably it has an immediate date as well. So no Steve books for either of those two, but Men on Horseback definitely, I probably need to get to that tonight. But those are the books that are yet to come. But then I thought I would show you some other books that I've been reading. I started out by reading the Sydney Pasalter. This is the Psalms, the 150 Psalms, reimagined as works of complex metricality by Sir Philip Sidney and his sister Mary. Really by Mary and her brother Philip, because Mary did the bulk of the work. And they're absolutely lovely. This is the Oxford World Classics edition that has a ton of explanatory notes. But just reading the Psalms themselves is an amazingly calming experience. And realizing why you would go to the bother of doing something like this. And one of the main reasons is for performance, for singing in church, where the Psalms as we originally have them, sprawling across centuries, written by who knows how many people in how many different literary traditions, don't suit themselves to that, whereas this kind of metrically elaborated psalm does. And it shows the genius of these two when they got in the same room together and were working on the same project. Just this has been, I go back to the Sydney Pasalter many times, and I always enjoy it. I always enjoy it. That sort of whet my appetite, of course, because running through the Psalms that the Sydneys adapted and transformed and expanded is, of course, a living theology, the living theology of their day. And that stood me in good stead when I had been reading and grappling with this Megillah, Gary Dorian's book, In a Post-Hegelian Spirit, that I got from Baylor University, and thought the worst. I thought, naturally, I thought the worst of this thing. I expected the worst of it. But I have been extremely pleasantly surprised. This is, there's one point here, it's a line you really shouldn't, if you're an author, you really shouldn't put a line like this in your book, because it's just a red flag to a reviewer. They're going to use it against you in a way that's just merciless. At one point, the author writes that the right to be vague became an important principle for one of his characters. And that's just low-hanging fruit, to give a reviewer a phrase like the right to be vague. And I confess that the right to be vague I thought was the thing I would be worried about throughout this whole book, but I was not. I have been consistently surprised. This is an amazingly good writer, and he is actually making these subjects, the subjects of the Marxian economic interpretation and Hegelian spiritual interpretation, he's making these subjects, which are abstruse to put it mildly, consistently fascinating from page to page. I want to read you a couple of bits here. I don't know how out of context these are. We'll give it a try. At every turn, Tillich addressed the question of what he took from Marx and whether religious socialism worked better without Marxism. For the first question was always complicated for him, and the second question was not. The answer was no. Tillich acknowledged that the Engels and Kautsky economic materialism was very problematic, and Marx contributed mightily to the problem. There was no denying that orthodox Marxism denigrates all ideas, artistic and literary creations, spiritual values, moral intuitions, and love and feelings as superstructural rationalizations of economic interests. But Tillich said orthodox Marxism was never an adequate summary of Marx's complex thought, and the recent publication of the early Marx grappling with Hegel clarified his purpose and meaning. Marx was routinely interpreted as teaching that spirit, Geist, is causally dependent on economics. Tillich countered that spirit is not a thing, and neither is economics. Economics is infinitely complex and multifaceted, involving the direction and quality of needs, modes of production, and social relationships, scales of enterprise, and virtually every other aspect of human being. Economics cannot be isolated and made the cause of something intrinsic to it, namely the spirit. Neither is spirit anything in and of itself. Spirit is always the spirit of something. Quote, the spirit of a being that, through spirit, achieves self-understanding. Marx grasped this connection between being and consciousness, taking from Hegel that the unity of being and consciousness is lost when being is conceived as a discrete cause from which spirit flows as a discrete effect. Tillich put it more bluntly, there is no such being and no such spirit. I don't know how well you would need to know Tillich or Hegel or Marx to be following along there, but I was enjoying the heck out of that in a place that I expected would be a desert. And then the book takes off when it gets to social justice, when it gets to social movements. Oh boy. Oh boy. I want to read you another bit here. And this bit involves Alex Haley, the author of Roots, who is here in conversation with Martin Luther King. Haley asked if black churches did better at projecting a social gospel, and King hedged on no. It was hard to mobilize black ministers because they shunned movements they did not organize, and most had no experience with movement activism. Many just wanted to preach about heaven. King stressed the difference, however, between the situations of white and black churches. White churches were not oppressed, while black churches were subjected to the worst brutality ever inflicted on Christian churches anywhere. There was no basis of comparison. Haley asked how one could be militant and nonviolent at the same time. King said this was like realism and idealism. The seeker of justice must be realistic and idealistic, holding both in tension. Nonviolence is a healing sword, quote, a weapon fabricated of love. Haley observed that many whites believed that civil rights movement had gone far enough and should cease. King's response was blistering, quote, why do white people seem to find it so difficult to understand that the Negro is sick and tired of having reluctantly parceled out to him those rights and privileges which all others receive upon birth or entry in America? I never cease to wonder at the amazing presumption of much of white society, assuming that they have the right to bargain with the Negro for his freedom. This continued arrogant ladling out of pieces of the rights of citizenship that has begun to generate a fury in the Negro. Close quote. The fury in King was evident to anyone willing to see it. That's our author saying that, and he is very good throughout this book at pointing out what's right there in the words, but that you might have missed. He does that with philosophers as well. That's just eye-opening. King here observed that abysmal ignorance about racial justice prevailed among white Americans, and three groups were especially significant. One was the whole class of, quote, bigots and backlashers that attacked the civil rights movement. Another group, woefully ignorant public officials, discharged their responsibilities without recognizing the harm they caused because it never occurred to them to listen to black people. The third group was the hardest to take, quote, enlightened types who gave nauseating counsel about proceeding gradually. And here we have King. This is another quote from King. I wonder at men who dare to feel that they have some paternalistic right to set the timetable for another man's liberation. And it goes on from there. And of course, you can see, I can see now when I got to it, I can see that it's not out of left field. A systematic theology is going to be social justice. It's going to be a social justice theology. Of course, Martin Luther King is going to come into it. But one way or another, this book has been a playground. And believe you me, I think you probably remember when I hauled it on this channel, I was not expecting that. So that was terrific. But it's mighty heavy going. It's mighty heavy going. I am plowing through it. I am working my way through the footnotes. I am enjoying, as you can tell from those excerpts, this author knows what he has to do. He knows that his responsibility is to interest you, to keep you interested. He is not writing this at all for the five scholars dancing on the head of a pin who all know post-Hegelian theology backwards and forwards. He is not writing for them. And the idea that you could write a book like this for Baylor University Press and not be writing for them astonishes me. Just astonishes me. So I've been playing around in this book. I've been reading it and loving it, looking forward every day to grappling with some new part of it, and that is not what I was expecting. But I have needed a break now and again. And when you need something, when you need a break, you go to the gays. So I did. I got approved for a book on NetGalley. It's a reissue of a gay novel, and I read it and mostly liked it. I was very appreciative of some of the strange things that it does. It's by Jude Monroe. It's called Born for Leaving. This is the cover, the new cover for the reissue. I don't even want to show you the old cover. The new cover's bad enough. Naturally, and Born for Leaving is a phrase used by one of the characters. One of the characters is named Bodie, and the other is named Oliver. Oliver works at a bar. Bodie is both his new tenant in his beachside cottage and also the new bouncer at the bar, and quickly becomes his love interest. And Bodie refers to himself, says that his mother referred to him as born for leaving. That's just someone who makes himself comfortable, gets to know some people, and then moves on, and doesn't put down roots. And when I heard, I saw the title and I saw that description, I naturally thought of the great Trisha Yearwood. What's the word? Walk Away Joe? Her great song, where she talks about the low life guy that her main character is falling in love with is born for leaving. He's born to be leaving. I thought of that, but it's quite different, of course. In the song, Walk Away Joe is the wrong kind of paradise. He's trouble, and it's just a matter of when the girl will figure it out. You'd be able to figure it out right away in the Trisha Yearwood video because the boy is Matthew McConaughey. I mean, that's trouble right there. But it turns out that Jude Monroe, I'm not 100% sure that's the author's real name, but Jude Monroe has a lot more going on than that. Because Bodie is a dream come true. Oliver is tall and handsome, and he's saving up for a car, and he's working at a bar, and he's had an affair with his boss, and he's a fairly he's an interesting character. Bodie is a stereotypical gay fiction character on the surface. He's 6'5". He's bristling with muscles that are coming out his eyeballs. He's got gorgeous face, gorgeous everything. Wears a tall Stetson and rides a Harley Davidson and whatnot. And at first you're looking at that kind of a clash between not necessarily. Oliver is not prissy. But he is not, the strapping gay love interest muscle god at all. And when he meets one, I was expecting the usual kind of clash between those two things. But it turns out that Jude Monroe has a lot more complicated things to do in this book, because Bodie has only ever had one previous sexual experience with a man, and it was when he was 8. He was abused when he was 8. It gradually comes to light with him and Oliver as they are falling in love, both personally and also erotically. And it's well done. That part of the story is well done. There are some of the usual crutches of gay fiction. There's a dog in the story who is the character's, he's Oliver's dog, and Oliver pays lip service quite a bit to how his dog is his best friend, but he doesn't treat the dog like a best friend at all. I know some of you will say, well, you are a little bit the wrong person to talk to when it comes to how you treat your dogs. But, okay, maybe so. Maybe so. I consider dogs to be people. I consider most complex animals to be people. If you keep it, the way Oliver treats his dog in this book is not the way you would treat your best friend. But nevertheless, there's also a bad guy who does all sorts of the usual kinds of operatically horrible bad guy stuff that tends to occur to the main character or a side character in contemporary gay fiction that isn't believable at all. It wouldn't happen, much less happen many times. It wouldn't happen like something out of a comic book. And in this particular novel, the particular bad guy, Dale, if you removed him lock, stock, and barrel from the story, you would still have a great story. You would still, only if you remove him, the story would be entirely believable. Only with him in it, there's an element that makes you say, oh, come on, come on. Aren't things hard enough here without this? This is a little baroque, isn't it? But it's a very direct writing style, and the scenes, periodically we get scenes of Oliver and Bodie growing to trust each other more in bed, and that is difficult to do well, and Jude Monroe does that very well. The plot twist 2/3 of the way through the book, you see coming a mile away, and you'll know exactly how it's going to be resolved. And also, the original cover for this book was horrible. It was just horrible. So I wholeheartedly agree with the author giving this a gussy up cover-wise and posting it again on NetGalley, hoping to drum up attention. I will certainly give it attention. I'll give it a review. The original cover was a drawing, and it was hideous, and the creature on the cover I think was supposed to be the dog. But this cover isn't any better. This is clearly meant to make the gaze all hot and bothered, but it isn't an accurate reflection of the book. That is obviously supposed to be Oliver, and that's not. Oliver is not. The character in the book would make a more interesting figure on a cover if you did it accurately. Oliver is more self-doubting. He's not consciously pouty and sultry like that. And the character in the hat is obviously supposed to be Bodhi, but I don't know. I could just picture some sort of stereotypical midtown Manhattan fashion maven putting together this cover and saying, "Oh, we hear in the book all the time about a hat. Oh, have I got a hat for you?" But that is not a Stetson. Okay, we're told over and over again what kind of a hat Bodhi wears, and that's not it. It makes on the cover, it makes this character look like some sort of New Orleans hustler. The cover doesn't do the book justice, is what I'm saying. It doesn't accurately reflect the book at all. But I have a problem with covers quite a bit of the time. The point is that the book did what it was supposed to do, which was distract me from Hegel. I don't know that that's gonna be its purpose for everybody, but it was for me. It was a wonderful, involving story, a minimal amount of cast members, and a gradual and very well done series of personal revelations about Bodhi that really anchor the book and that make him more than just, you know, a poster dream child of the 6'5" brawny cowboy. He ends up being much more than that, and that I was grateful for that. So that's it. It's sort of a wander around my reading. You've got Hegel and the Gaze. You've got the Sydney Pasalter. You've got new books. This is just sort of a bookish snapshot. I don't know what to call it, but I miss talking to you about books. So this has gone on a bit long. I'm going to lay down. So I'm gonna wrap this up for now. But I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.